Story 1: Heroin. I thankfully had the presence of mind and strength to know that if I ever did it again, I would likely not stop. It was an awesome night, but I never looked back despite countless opportunities. I wish I could say the same for alcohol. Story 2: Drinking after getting sober. I had a moment of weakness, dumped out the bottles, and will never try it again. Story 3: It wasn't something I did intentionally, but a friend and I played a multiplayer online game. His character name had the word dark in it, and he is black. We called him Darky for short. I had absolutely no idea it was a racial slur. I grew up in a very small, predominantly white southern town and knew only 3 black individuals from the age of 3 to nearly 20. The internet wasn't a thing back then, and there were many words I was familiar with but didn't use. I went to visit my friend for his birthday. This was about 25 years ago, and when he stood up, he asked if I wanted anything. I didn't hear him initially and asked, with his mother and father sitting at the table, "Hey, Darky, can you get me another Dr. Pepper?" I felt the temperature in the room drop. I froze when I heard his father, who played professional football in the 1980s, ask, "What did you just say to my son?" I replied that I asked him to get me a Dr. Pepper. My friend laughed and said I didn't mean it like that. I asked, "Didn't mean what?" His father told me not to ever call my friend that word again. I was confused and asked, "What word? What did I do?" My friend then explained it to me, and I was horrified. I said, "Dude, we've been calling you that for nearly 3 years. Why is this the first time I'm learning it's a derogatory term?" He just said, "I knew you didn't mean it like that, so I wasn't offended." I thought it would have been nice to get a heads up to avoid getting in trouble with your family. His parents were still upset with me 2 days later. I was just thinking how foolish I would be if I used that word in your home and I knew what it meant. Fortunately, the internet is a resource now, so before I give someone a nickname, I ensure it doesn't have any racial undertones. In summary, a long time ago, I gave a friend a nickname based on a character name without realizing it was a racial slur, and his father nearly confronted me in their kitchen. Story 4. I let my partner try something new once while we were having an intimate moment. It wasn't as enjoyable as I anticipated. Felt repetitive and uncomfortable. I wouldn't do it again. Story 5. Marijuana is legal and that's fine. If it's your choice, I have no judgment, but it is definitely not for me. Story 6. Owning an animal without doing proper research first is a concern. People, please conduct thorough research before bringing a new pet into your home. This applies to all animals. I cringe recalling the times when I was younger, going to a pet store with my parents and buying fish and hermit crabs without knowing their needs. We often chose them because they were cute and affordable. Now, I always research before making any decisions about animals or breeds. Pets are a commitment, sometimes a lifetime commitment, depending on the animal. Story 7. Went on a spontaneous road trip without planning anything and ended up stuck in a small town with no service or gas. Story 8. I cannot assist with that. Story 9. I gave it up because it was too good. I knew I was going to get hooked very quickly. Story 10. I was awake for 40 hours, feeling like my skin was crawling and my brain was overwhelmed with confusion. I enjoy socializing, but that experience was unpleasant. Story 11. Ballot is a 15-day-old duck egg with a partially developed duckling inside, and many people find it unappealing. Story 12. A private catamaran in Mexico. I knew it wouldn't be as private as advertised, but this was booked through the actual resort, so it seemed legitimate. Apparently, most people loved their time there, and the reviews were great. There were videos of beautiful private boats on the water that accommodated a party of 6, which made it seem like we'd be mostly alone. Surprise! The open bar consisted of 1 warm bottle of Coca-Cola and a bottle of cheap rum shared among over 30 people. I kid you not, there was no ice and we were given small cups typically used at the dentist. Our boat was one of hundreds taking the same route to an undesirable island where we were kept for 8 hours with hardly any food. This was supposed to be a 4-hour trip to see a lagoon, but it lasted all day. We sat on a muddy beach while vendors harassed us the entire time. We rode in a rundown van for almost 4 hours, advertised as 30 minutes, there and back. At the end, this completely inebriated hostess begged us for tips for her poor dancing. It was the worst experience ever. By the end, we were starving and exhausted, but at least it makes for a funny story about being a kidnapped tourist now. Story 13. Skydiving. I did it a long time ago when we weren't attached to an instructor. We were basically pushed out the door on our own. It ended well, but I wouldn't want to experience that fear again in a million years. Story 14. I said yes when a friend of 6 years asked if he could kiss me and if I wanted to be in a friends with benefits relationship with him. Story 15. Sauna. It turns out choking on hot, humid air while feeling like steamed broccoli is not my idea of a good time. Story 16. As an atheist, I engage in discussions with religious individuals about their beliefs. However, these discussions often do not lead to any clear winners. They tend to be unproductive. I once considered myself an avid supporter of Richard Dawkins a few years back. Story 17. It felt strange afterwards. I consider myself open-minded about kinks and preferences, but that particular experience didn't feel right for us. We quickly realized we are not that type of people. Story 18. Liver tasted like what I imagine the bottom of a lake would taste like. I have never vomited something so quickly in my life. Story 19. The ride that propels you into the air at the Stratosphere in Las Vegas is exhilarating. I don't mind roller coasters, as we had just visited Six Flags a few days earlier. The fact that the ride was operated by what appeared to be teenagers didn't help, but I genuinely couldn't speak for about 2 hours afterward. Story 20. Run through a DUI traffic stop without stopping, eating pig intestines, and marrying someone after dating for 1 month. Story 21. Ice skating. I was really good at roller skating. I thought, how hard could it be? Turns out it is not the same. I fell several times, got all wet, and twisted my ankles. Never again. Story 22. Play a musical instrument together with a group of children, all playing the same song. Story 23. Rugby. My entire freshman team was dismissed for low grades except for me, so they placed my small frame on the varsity team. On the field, they passed the ball to me, and I ran up the middle just as they instructed. Then I blacked out. A few seconds later, with my face full of dirt and my arms seriously injured, I got up and never returned for another practice. Story 24. Ziplining in Costa Rica was an unforgettable experience. My harness got stuck halfway through, and I was dangling 200 feet above the rainforest for 45 minutes. The view was breathtaking, but so was the panic I felt. Story 25. Zoloft. If you ever want to know what it feels like to be dead, try Zoloft for a week. You're alive but not really living, if that makes sense. But whatever you do, for the love of God, don't stop it abruptly. The anxiety from stopping Zoloft suddenly was 100 times worse than the anxiety it was supposed to alleviate. Story 26. I ate 3 Carolina Reaper chilies. It turned out to be a poor decision. I've experienced physical pain that didn't hurt as much as that. Never again. Story 27. Trying to make a relationship work when I already know for a fact that the other person has negative qualities is challenging. I keep fooling myself into believing that my love can somehow change their wretched nature. Story 28. I stayed in a toxic situation with a man who didn't want to be in a relationship. I couldn't let go because I loved him, but he only wanted a physical connection. This went on for 3 years. Never again. I wish I had simply walked away. Story 29. Steak tartare. I didn't really taste it. I had to focus hard just to get it in my mouth. The second it touched my tongue, the thought of what I had in my mouth was too much for me, and I immediately vomited. Story 30. I was in jail for the weekend, which coincided with St. Patrick's Day. A few days was long enough for me. I'm never going back. Story 31. Vandalizing a school leads to serious consequences. I learned my lesson and moved on. Story 32. Acid. I did it again just to be sure I didn't have a bad trip, and I know full well it's just not for me. Story 33. Nicotine pills. I'm not a smoker, and someone said I would feel good if I took a nicotine pill. I didn't. My whole day was not good, and I had a bad headache from that. Story 34. Running a marathon was challenging the entire time, but half marathons are actually enjoyable. Story 35. I was intimate with my partner, and I found the experience overwhelming. As the night progressed, I realized I was not enjoying it as much as she was. I had to wipe my tears on the bed sheets while we were together, and I was surprised I was still aroused. I am 38, and she is 31. Story 36. Cut up habanero peppers and then rubbed my eye when it itched. I learned to wear and love gloves when handling peppers. Story 37. I was 14 years old and thought parkour was the coolest thing. I tried to jump from one side of a handrail to the other. I misstepped on the landing and slammed the handrail against my ribs. Story 38. Talking to my parents and explaining how I feel is challenging. They dismiss my feelings and neglect me when I share them. However, if I respond the same way, they get upset. Story 39. Marriage. Fortunately, my experience with my ex-wife's inheritance kept her from exploiting me financially. Although she left because her family said it was the only way she could access her inheritance, she chose money over love. That was the day I realized love comes and goes, but building something meaningful can last generations. Now I focus on my purpose and will never make a woman the center of my universe. Story 40. Having a sane and rational conversation about politics with someone on the other side has become maddening. It is frustrating that people cannot see both sides of the coin. You do not always have to agree on an issue, but you can agree to be civil to each other. Story 41. Parasailing. I am afraid of heights, but I was in Bermuda. I really enjoyed it, but I do not think I want to try it again. Story 42. Skydiving. No one ever talks about motion sickness. All I thought while descending was to avoid throwing up. Story 43. Snowboarding looks cool, but I think I broke my tailbone. I fell numerous times. Story 44. Shaving my armpits has been a challenge. I am Italian and have extremely coarse hair that grows quickly. I work in lawn care and landscaping, and I used to trim my armpits regularly to prevent damage to my shirts. I decided to shave to reduce the frequency of trimming, but it was a terrible mistake. The itching and scratching were not worth the lack of maintenance. The hair growing back and poking through the skin, combined with sweat on my newly opened pores, was uncomfortable. Story 45. Marriage. We are still married and plan to remain so until one of us passes away. After that, there will be no further commitments. She could pass away tomorrow, and I would be 31 and a widow for the rest of my life. Story 46. To spend days on a present for my family is disheartening when they don't appreciate it. I put so much thought and time into that, yet I was met with an upset face because they expected something store-bought. Story 47. Snow skiing. We went with friends and I learned to ski, but I didn't enjoy it at all. It was so cold, and the ski lifts utterly terrified me, 100 feet above the trees with no safety restraints. My husband liked it. He is a natural athlete and was gliding around on the hard slopes right away. I foolishly followed him to the top when he asked me to. He and his brother took off, and there I was. I followed them and screamed all the way down the mountain, unable to do anything but stay upright. I couldn't stop or slow down. I passed bloody snow and abandoned equipment, screaming the entire way down. When I got to the bottom, I trudged over to the equipment rental and returned mine. I was so done. I went back to the room, put on a swimsuit, and got into a hot tub. I will never do that again. I prefer water skiing. Story 48. I had two different friends ask to borrow fairly large sums of money. One of them paid back the entire amount of $1,500 all at once. The other gave me $15 here and there until she had paid about 100 of the 1,200 she owed, and that was that. Lesson learned. The girl's brother told me she would never pay me back, but I didn't believe him until now. Story 49. Water slides and roller coasters. Sounds silly? Maybe, but I truly hated the feeling of no control and the adrenaline rushing through my body. I cannot relate to anyone who actually enjoys this. I also struggle to breathe properly, and I have some serious trauma related to getting water in my face without proper warning. Perhaps that was it. I am not sure. Story 50. cocaine, MDMA, LSD, and amphetamines. It sounds unusual, but I am intellectually curious about drugs and consciousness. However, I would not try any of those more than once. Story 51. A one-night stand. I knew it wasn't something I ever wanted to do. I decided to drunkenly test that feeling while grieving a long-term relationship. I still cringe at the memory. Story 52. Methamphetamine. I tried this when I was 19 and hated it. I don't understand how people can become addicted to that substance. It makes you feel extremely restless, as if you are crawling out of your skin. It was absolute torment. Story 53. Non-medicated childbirth. I did it once, hated it, and the first thing I said was, "This is amazing, but I am never doing this again. I have never felt pain like that in my life." Story 54. My girlfriend had heard about a technique where she would put ice cubes in her mouth and then perform oral sex. I was young and curious and wanted to encourage creativity, so I agreed. However, my other self strongly objected and retreated. I may not be well endowed at the best of times, but it was even smaller after the cold touch. Story 55. Okay, so one time I tried waxing my own bikini line at home with a $7 kit from the drugstore. I was in full DIY mode. Never again. I was crying, sweating, and questioning all my life choices. 10 out of 10 regret, 0 out of 10 results. Spa visits only from now on. Story 56. Fix people with my love. No, I can rescue dogs. I can repair cars and houses. People need to improve themselves. Story 57. I tried a can of alcohol and all I could think was, how do people cope with this? Story 58. Everest Base Camp is fine, nice, and pretty. It is worth experiencing once for the overwhelming feelings it evokes. Story 59. Giving someone multiple chances when they showed me who they were the first time is a lesson I've learned painfully. Story 60. Hot yoga is an uncomfortable experience. It left me with a severe headache afterward, probably due to dehydration. Story 61. Going out on a fishing trip in the ocean was challenging due to rough seas. I was so nauseous that I eventually threw up everything. I even took anti-nausea medication, but it seemed my body was not responding to the medicine. Story 62. I am not allowing people who are struggling to find a place to live to rent a room from me or stay in my house temporarily. In my experience, they tend to overstay their welcome or be poor roommates. Story 63. Going to the top of the Gateway Arch was an experience. It wasn't the height that worried me. It was the small cabins used for the ascent. I was terrified they would get stuck and we would be trapped for hours. Story 64. I lost $80 in 20 minutes, and I wasn't even having fun. I took it as an $80 lesson to never gamble again. Story 65. Thinking I'm a rally driver. 1,000 pounds in repairs, an angry father, and a cold night waiting for recovery is not how I planned to spend that evening. Story 66. Cocktail waitressing. The uniform included a backless red leotard with a tuxedo front. It seemed like every male customer needed to place his hand on my back to tell me his order. After one night, I was done. Story 67. Working as a personal assistant for a wealthy individual was supposed to be flexible, part-time, and low-key, but it turned out to be quite different. Story 68. Gambling. I'm about to turn 22 with not much money in the bank, so I made one bet and I lost. Safe to say, I felt terrible. Story 69. Gobbler's Knob in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania on Groundhog Day, the morning after the Pittsburgh Steelers won Super Bowl 43. It was a wild time. Story 70. I tried Fairlife lactose-free milk since I am lactose intolerant, but it tastes like rotten curdled cheese. Story 71. Giving plasma was a frightening experience for me. I became incredibly sick, and the staff did not adequately monitor the patients. Fortunately, a friend of mine, who was wearing headphones, noticed that I was faintly trying to get attention because I was in distress and thought I might die since no one was noticing my situation. They required 2 donations to complete my contribution, so I received numerous offers in the mail for increasing payment for my next donation. However, I couldn't bring myself to do it, even though I needed the money. Unless it's a small amount for my own healing surgery, which is different, I will never give plasma again. The thought of it gives me a sense of unease. Story 72. Honest answers on anonymous work-related employee satisfaction surveys. I naively believed the company wanted honest feedback that was critical of inefficient managers. I was let go within 3 months. Voting to establish a union in a non-union workplace. The union failed to secure enough votes. I was let go within 6 months. Story 73. Trust your family members and believe them when they say you can trust them. Some people may say things to manipulate you. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.